All right, so welcome to channel 27, everybody. I'm Heidi. If you are new and haven't came to my channel, I'm a Vedic astrologer, and today's a wonderful day again. We have Clif back with us, and I'm so excited today because this is one of my favorite topics, is talking about deep state and talking about Q and everything like that. So now Clif is here, and he's good. I can't wait to hear Clif's opinion on this. If there's anybody's opinion that I respect so much and really do take legit, like it's legitimate, it's Clif. So Clif, thanks for coming back on.
Sure, happy to. Yeah.
All right, so let's just start with, we can just start with Q if you'd like. So I'm so curious to know what your opinion is, because I know I sent you an email and I said about Q being legit or not. So and you kind of responded and you said, well, it's not legit, but you know. So tell me what you think.
Okay, so as with anything in the information age, you've got to be aware of the potential for pollution. Okay, both of the central meme itself, mimics, hijacking, and then also the idea of sort of a group surround that goes towards debunking and stuff. So it falls under the system, under the idea that anything left in place long enough will be gamed. Okay, so you know that's why if you don't that's why the people that manufacture safes change their locks every 6 months, every year. They redo the whole design, right? Because anything left in place long enough, they'll get to the point where people could crack it very easily. So we have to be aware that the meme itself is bound to be attacked as it has legs, as it grows further in time. Here you're talking about a meme that started in Halloween. And so you also have to, another thing you have to be aware of is whenever you're dealing with intelligence services, known or unknown, but just if you suspect that it's an intelligence service operative or somebody trained by these guys that you may be dealing with or who may be releasing the information, then you need to be aware that there's going to be multiple layers of meaning that can be assigned to any given action, not just merely what they say, but like when they say it and where they're at when they say it. Mm-hmm. So under the circumstances, the most pure form of the meme will be encountered in its early period. And then as the pollution grows, as more and more attacks come around it, the whole meme is becoming older, but also becoming more and more polluted as you go forward. Right. So you're going to end up with, at some point, and the people that would attack the meme are not necessarily coordinated, not necessarily directed by intelligence services or whatever. They're just people that hold differing opinions and or want to piggyback off of the cachet of the name in the social media, you know, when they're putting their videos together, et cetera, so that they can use it to springboard their views, get their clicks up. So they have all these people have their own motivation. There will be some people within these kind of things that will be intelligence services or, you know, want to discredit it, et cetera. But none of that diminishes the core of the information that began at a certain date. And if you look at the linguistics and examine those things that fall within the linguistics and are purported to be part of the original meme, then you can be pretty sure you're actually looking at authentic stuff. Now, it's my opinion that you're dealing here with a single mind that's putting everything out into the format that's presented to the public. Doesn't necessarily mean that person's operating alone, but it does mean that there's going to be a linguistic signature. Certain words will be used in preference to others, certain symbols, etc. I find nothing inconsistent between October of last year and today to say that anything has changed relative to that. You see all different kinds of people that are constantly debunking everything, again, for their own motivation. Right. And, you know, some of them indeed probably are paid trolls or paid operatives that want to start this thing off. And will piggyback in on other people, and they'll try and generate a certain amount of drama to draw people, to get more energy involved. They'll fight, you know, sometimes they'll be the controlled opposition shouting fiercely that the the meme is accurate, it's original, but they'll be putting stuff in what they're shouting that makes you doubt what they're saying, right? So they're polluting by inference, even though they appear to be in support of the original meme. It's really complicated. But again, this grows over time. The growth of it over time itself is meaningful. And so if you just look at the sheer amount of text related to this, since November 1 of last year through to now, you see that the amount of peripheral attacks has significantly grown around the core of the central meme. And that this means that it enhances my view that the original meme is indeed accurate. Just like it's self-referencing, very much like the blockchain, in the sense that there's tells from universe that are saying, that you're accurately reading the lay of the land. And some of these tells are in dates that are chosen to set out specific words. All of this stuff can be plotted over time if you have a computer and the inclination. You can do it in like spreadsheets even. Do an extract of the language, put in the dates, and see what sets of language appear on what dates, and you get a real good idea of what's maybe being said at a higher level. So for instance, one thing you can do is to look at information that comes out on one day and just collect all the language. Go to it and just do this over time and see what intersections you have in that complete set over what periods of time and for how long they're maintained. It sort of makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, well, a little bit, but I guess also, do you think that, so in your opinion, just not from data or anything else like that, right, do you think it has to do with Trump? Do you think it's somebody in Trump's campaign and some Trump that is affiliated with him? Or do you think it's somebody that's just a huge supporter? Or do you think it's,
no, I would say you're dealing with someone that's been trained in a particular kind of language. Okay. And so I think that this person would be government trained with some level of, some level of history doing it. They need not necessarily have been doing it for 10 years, but they're quite comfortable. And there's never been a break in the way in which the language is presented. Thus, I think that this is somebody that perhaps works for the deep state. I would not have thought that this was an individual that was a political operative, right? The language is just not the same. The level of or the angles of the drama that are inherent in the language are not the same between the political and the civil servant. Right.
Yeah, that's definitely, I totally agree with that. And, but there's so many rumors that like it's JFK, it's part of the Kennedy. What about that? Yeah. Like, what your thoughts are on that? Do you think that's
okay? That's like I don't think about such things because it's a waste of my mental energy, right? Because it can't be resolved.
Right.
And so it's one of those things where you say universe and time abide and you wait for a resolution and you get on with your business and let other people be distracted by, going down rabbit holes that never end.
Yeah. Well, and I think it makes me worry once it hits so mainstream. That's when I was like, oh God, really? Because when it goes there, it just seems to get so twisted. And, I follow this guy, Michael Trim. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or seen him.
I think I'm aware of him, but I don't know that I've seen anything.
Well, right. And he's definitely the one who has kept me full-fledged force on Q because I didn't even know what the hell it was. The first conversation we had, I'm like, what's this Q? Somebody asked that question. But it is pretty interesting that if it is, how our whole globally, everything's evolving and changing. People are actually paying attention to it now. And it's just, regardless, it's giving some valid information. So
yeah, and actually some prescient information too. So there's things that are said that appear or manifest some number of days later.
Right. And then in your web bots, and to go with that, I mean, you have in here, I just went through it again earlier, and you talk about so many times about how social media is going to get so crazy this summer. And you were even talking about how there are observers who will be coming out with the stories. Was that Q? Would you say that could be considered as Q?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
It's never fails. But and what is your thoughts now with the whole like Mueller, the investigation, the whole campaign? What about all that kind of stuff, the Manafort stuff.
I think of it as theater. Okay, so let's look at our physical relationship. You're very close to the center of it.
Yes.
I'm 3,000 plus miles away. Out here, it's a big shrug. Who cares? It doesn't
Right.
it doesn't impact the weird weather or any of the strange things that are going on in our daily lives around here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at one level, everybody would say, okay, well, you're not paying attention to media, and that this is a big deal for a vast number of generation. And I agree that this is what you're talking about there at a political level is fundamentally the Watergate for this particular generation, for your generation and younger. Okay, it's the big political drama that is going to occupy everything for a period of about 8 months, the same way that we ended up with the Watergate and then Nixon resigns and all of that kind of business, right? But that is our reality as it is sculpted by the media and presented to us, and lots of people are consumed by this. But when I contrast it to very real things that are happening locally, it seems very illusionary and very ephemeral. And I can contrast it to really strange things that are happening locally. Like we had here on March 1, we had a supposed meteor crash down 17 miles off coast, or 15 miles off the coast, about 17 miles south of us. It shook our house. So if this thing came over 17 miles south of us, it was coming over with such velocity and gravitas that it was shaking houses for an area of 30 plus miles. It was viewed as a spaceship in distress by locals that it overflew.
Wow.
And there were people that showed up later to talk to those locals, men in black type reputedly. And then something else that was odd was that the U.S. Navy and NOAA had ships out there looking for the thing. And this has never happened that any officialdom in our country ever went looking for a water impacting meteorite. They also said this thing was the size of a golf cart and was the largest meteorite to impact North American continent in over 20 years, the largest meteor. And it was quite sizable. I mean, it made our house feel like a washing machine out of balance, the whole house just going in a way earthquakes don't.
Wow.
And so it was quite odd, and that's very real. And the repercussion, they didn't find anything other than when they went looking, they sent boats and spent money on it. All they found were two 1 millimeter chunks that they're claiming came from it. I actually think it was probably a spaceship and drove off once it went in the water. But in any event, it's the people on the East Coast are going to find this to be a very ephemeral kind of a thing, very illusionary, not meaningful at all, especially since you guys are all buried in the political morass that's around us, right? But the further out west you get, there's a reason that we have California as the land of fruits and nuts viewed from the East Coast, and it's because the level of separation physically is also separating us from those things that are emotionally impacting all around us. So I see all of that as being as ephemeral as Watergate, and will run its course with probably the same amount of emotional energy unleashed relative to the size of the population as happened with Watergate. Bear in mind that, people, when Nixon resigned, people were horrified. Lots and lots of people in my generation were just horrified and pissed off that the vice president of the time who took power, Gerald Ford, first thing he does is to pardon Nixon, saying we've got to get over this and heal and all of this kind of thing, right? And so their justification aside, the emotional angst that it produced for an entire generation affected us for probably 4 or 5 years. And I expect that level of emotional impact on the social order as a result of the current situation. What I find very annoying is that there are those people that are trying to profit from this.
Yeah. It's crazy right now. I mean, especially here. And I think, people are losing their minds. Like, I just feel that the whole world is a little out of control.
Well, that's true, independent of what's actually happening. So there's a very truism to what you're saying, and from an astrological viewpoint, I'm certain that there's planets up there that are mucking about with us all, right?
Yeah.
But what's actually happening at one level is there are indeed extra energies penetrating to the planet that are affecting all of us now, and so a lot of the craziness and a lot of the people losing their minds, it's not a cause of anything. It's the manifestation. It's the result of these other forces, and the way in which they're actually manifesting in our lives is this level of craziness, because we're not aware of the energies. Therefore, we think they're internal. And so you start reacting to them thinking they're, integral to you, but in fact, it might be the result of the extra UV light, cosmic rays, overall heating of the planet, extra different kinds of energies we're not aware of, all of these kinds of things. But I agree with you. We're in a period of time when everything is a little crazy. It was Gurdjieff that called it the solilunius. And how the idea of a full moon makes everybody a lunatic. He said there are at times, and he didn't specify, unfortunately, but I think I know what he was talking about. But he was talking about, he was saying that there are times when the impact of the energies from the sun make the whole planet go mad, as though we were all living under a full moon, and it lasts a while. And so it could be that the two gas giants being on the same side of the sun as our orbit for the first time in 445 years is indeed warping energies in such a way, away from the sun in terms of shielding and more towards us. It's lengthening our orbit, all of these things, and we're picking them up and manifesting.
That makes sense. Astrologically, I mean, because I just know things. You're more scientific. I go by the planets and the skies and stuff, but there's a lot of heavy energy, and it's crazy. Like some of the people that I'm encountering, and I listen to police scanners just to listen to the overall vibes, like what's going on that day and the trends. And I listen to the transits and do this. And I mean, it just seems like it's just so, and I think there's so many distractions but back to what you were saying about the weather and stuff, about the sun. And we were talking about how hot it's getting. And can you touch on that? Because I do think that's a huge problem. I think that the weather here, it's confusing. The weather everywhere, it's
confusing everywhere.
It's
right.
Like, it just doesn't, it's weird. So what are your thoughts?
Okay. So we have a condition where Earth is a little bit further back away from the sun because it's expanding. Every time it expands, we get a little bit further away from the sun. We're being drugged by the sun like a comet dragging debris. We don't ever actually orbit the sun at the equatorial plane of the sun. And the sun is diminishing down to about 3,000 degrees Kelvin, which means there's more cosmic rays and stuff that come around the sun to come back and impact all the planets that it's dragging around with it. And so there actually are measurable amounts of extra energy coming in. The impacts on our planet for the past few years, from like the Banda Aceh earthquake, right, in 2003, it blew off like 5% by volume of our atmosphere, the cosmic rays and the solar flux that caused that earthquake. So on the same day on the same Boxing Day of the earthquake, we lost a big chunk of our atmosphere. We've also had ozone hole issues and so on. So we're actually being impacted by greater and greater, both individually, but also as a planet, by greater amounts of energies coming in. Some of these energies are including new forms of UV, ultraviolet. And it's not really a new form of UV. UV is a continuum. And the scientists arbitrarily divided into UVA and UVB. And then what was left over, they said, because we never saw what was left over. We usually only saw UVA rays and UVB. Now, bear in mind that ultraviolet is very energetic, it transfers a lot of energy when it comes on in. And UV is what causes all kinds of photosynthetic responses in plants. It heats up the planet. It's a big component to our weather. Well, recently, by recently, I mean maybe 4 or 5 years back, we've been having UVC. And that was this band of whatever was left over, which was very high frequency relative to the other types of UV, and also more energetic. And it had never come down below a certain level in our atmosphere. but now it's actually hitting the surface of the planet. And so it used to be that you could calculate based on your latitude about what the UV levels ought to be in the summer, okay? And so the tropics were the highest level of UV. So the lower your latitude towards zero, the higher level of UV you could expect to experience. And so if you got north of 30 degrees, you'd have less UV. In the summer, it would be cooler, generally more mild and temperate than areas below 30. Same would be true of 50 and then up into 60s. You'd have very low levels of UV. But that's no longer the case. So right now, when I check for UV combined A and B out here, which will also include C, I'm getting readings of about 13 to 13.5 at noon. And it shouldn't be over than 7 in my latitude. Should never get higher than 7. And Victoria, or guys in Vancouver Island, north of me by a whole degree or two, are getting the same kind of readings. And it should never in Canada be getting that high. The UVC causes metal to heat up, causes your skin to burn in a weird way where it's burning very deep because these rays penetrate a little bit deeper than the other UV rays. It also heats up very rapidly and you respond very rapidly. So there have been instances of children becoming quite ill on short walks in the Southwest here because the UV levels were so high, their body temperature rapidly got up into the hundreds, 103, 105, 109, just on a 2-block walk to a store. And we've had instances of livestock and pets that were dying or were killed by the high levels of UV. Again, in the Southwest, California, Utah, and Nevada, in that area. Not so much up here, although we've had an exceptionally high number of call-ins to police about dogs being left in cars in distress, right?
Yeah.
So all of this relates to the UV environment in which we're living now and in which we'll live for a number of years. It's part of a process that goes along with the Ice Age business, okay? And the process, in a general, vague kind of a way, sort of a general sketch, has more UV coming on in to a reduced atmosphere Earth until, and building up certain processes within that Earth until conditions exist that produce a lot of matter that goes up into the upper atmosphere that then starts screening out that UV. And that's part of the Ice Age process. This matter is usually associated with volcanoes and forest fires. Because the UV heats up lots of areas of the planet, the forests burn because the trees don't get the moisture, they die. They're more susceptible to this. Lightning strikes, sets it off, and it just keeps going. This is a historical kind of a recounting of where we were the last time that these conditions existed. And at the same time, the cosmic rays are also going up, and it's the cosmic rays that go zinging right through everything, including the planet, to get caught in the core of the planet by our plasma, and then they help the expando Earth actually expand by creating more matter inside the Earth that has to just keep pushing out, thus all the cracks in the planet and all of the indications of the water sloshing away from beaches and so on as the planet is physically expanding. And this causes the volcanoes to go as well. It excites all of this kind of thing. So every time that we go into one of these ice ages, every time we have the gas giants over on the same side of the sun as most of our orbit, we get a situation where there's much more volcanic activity. And at some point, a lot of volcanoes erupt and a lot of forests burn, and we get a layer of ash in the atmosphere that then blocks off all of the UV and the cosmic rays to some extent. And once that is thick enough and persistent enough, then the planet starts to cool down and we go into the Ice Age. And the Ice Age actually helps protect a lot of the ecosystem from these effects, which are cumulative, and if allowed to continue, would lead us into kind of like a Venus kind of a condition where we would have incredibly thick air that you could hardly breathe, and everything would just be too hot to exist in. But we're going to have a number of years of this too hot period. And it's probably going to cause all kinds of social disruptions. If we look at this historically, some of the great uh, great movements of humanity in time have been linked to these ice age periods in which the gas giants are altering our orbit. The last such one was the time of the Mongolian invasion of and takeover of most of Asia. That period of time was a period where the climatic conditions forced so the Mongolians had lived pretty well. Their population had grown significantly. And then the conditions changed and the whole population couldn't exist under the growing conditions they had. So they had to move south, and they just kept going and conquering and going and conquering. And they killed so many people in the process that they changed the carbon footprint of humanity, reducing it by 25%. So these kind of mass movements, these kind of giant social disruptions are associated with the times that are similar to the ones we're in now.
Yeah. So you think something, okay, astrologically, next year and the year after that look a little dicey. Let's just say that. Intense, to say the least. I don't know the best way to say it. I don't want to scare anybody, and but it's going to be ugly. And I'm curious to know if you feel that same way from your reports and what you think.
Yeah, there's counterbalancing to this, but relative to the stuff that I've seen in my data for a number of years, that's a good description. That we're going to go through a very ugly period of time at many different levels, economically, socially, et cetera, et cetera. And there's going to be pressures on us, but I had tendency these last few years to look at the things that are hidden within the data sets, are not quite as hidden, and are showing some level of hope. And so some of the things that I had seen was that just as we're getting into this period of time at the moment, we're also ramping up, albeit at a secret level, all of these hidden technologies, and now many that are not quite so hidden. So in this instance, we're no longer as dependent on the weather for our food production as former societies. We have global shipping, so we can get food from areas to, where they have excesses to areas where there's need. And also we now have new materials, so we're able to build and craft environments in which we needn't have the food involve itself at all with the external environment. We could grow food in the salt caves of Texas if we wanted to. So under the circumstances, I think that there's at least a significant chance, at least say better than 1 out of 3, that our technology can help overcome and mitigate some of the more horrific effects of the times that we're in.
And do you think it's going to be strictly weather? Or do you think it's going to be economically? You think it's everything?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, everything. See, everything is going to be affected by these, what I had termed as unknown energies from space. So we're in a situation where even ourselves, even our thought processes will be impacted by the environment through which we're time traveling, because our environment is changing around us. It's I keep saying it as though it's meaningful, and that is that when I was born, the sun was yellow and things were much more mellow in terms of the environment. Now the sun is white. It has a tendency to be harsh. So at that level, we're living in much harsher times. And we see these impacts, and we have to now become adaptive to them at a species level. So it's a waste of my time for people to come on up and yammer at me about global warming. And because my response is, so what are you doing about it? Right? And saying, well, I'm not going to drive my SUV as much. It's like, that's bullshit, guy. We could turn our SUVs on 24 hours a day and leave them running continuously, and they're not going to in any way impact our entry into the ice age, nor mitigate any of that. And so it means that the individuals that are following the global warming meme, pro or con, are basically being entrained in a particular level of thought that they're not going to take any action. So what they need to be doing is saying, oh, okay, global warming is going to cause X, Y, Z. I'd better, get a greenhouse or build a tunnel garden or something along these lines, just at a very practical level for the next few years. And maybe it's just that everyone is expecting, Big Brother to do it for them, Uncle Sam.
The government to take care of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And see, that right there is itself
Problem.
a giant problem. Exactly. So if you're not self-reliant, you're not self-sufficient, you're not survivable.
Yeah, because they don't want us here anyway. So
there is that, right? They're pissed at us. Right.
So you can't pay attention. So do you think when you're saying things are coming from the sky, from space, do you feel, this is probably a stupid question, but do you think that's why Trump is so on this Space Force thing and making a whole new, like...
Okay, so here's the thing. All right, so I was doing some research on Antarctica, okay? And I was doing some research because I'd been talking with this guy, Al, at Forum Borealis extensively about Antarctica. And I like it. It's a fascinating place, and there's all kinds of cool history and so on. Anyway, I had done some correlation research when I say that, well, XYZ happened. What else happened in that period of time? Because I can find some markers that indicate that there was a shift of mental attitude at a radical way between one year and the next in the progression of the Antarctic Treaty. And considering that Antarctica is not like this, it's not like going to the Bahamas, not like going to the Caribbean, extremely harsh. The amount of energy that was involved in that transformation of a mindset from one year to the next was staggering. And it was quite clear that it happened back at a particular time in 86 or 87. The effect I observe, I can see in history completed by 1987. And from then on, it's just been gangbusters, balls to the walls. Let's get moving, get stuff down there, keep going with this, spend more money, build more outlying facilities in Australia, Patagonia, et cetera. Well, and so I was asking myself, what happened politically, socially, whatever, in 86 or 87 to cause this? And I haven't found 100% causative link, but I found a lot of temporal links and temporal correlations that make me come to a certain conclusion. And my conclusion is that the powers that be, maybe as early as the early 80s, but certainly by 87, were scared, and their language changed and their actions changed, and that what scared them came from the Voyager space program. Okay, I can pinpoint certain language shifts in that period of time, as well as certain restrictions on the information that had been coming fairly regularly from the Voyager program and was going into the social order. And it all changed at that period of time. So I think that when Voyager 1 and 2 got out close to the large gas giants and started photographing stuff, that they saw something that scared the absolute crap out of them, such that it motivated a whole lot of discussion, I'm sure, endless meetings that would drive a person crazy, but also made some new decisions about how things should happen. And that at that point in 87, so Voyager would have been about 10 years on, they released them up into the space and shot them out there in 77. And so by 87, they would have seen a number of things. And I think maybe somewhere in 85 or 86 or 87, probably not 87, probably 85 or 86, because knowing how slow government is and how reactive they are. And there were probably a whole year's worth of meetings. And then all of a sudden things changed in Antarctica in a huge way. And so I think that is what's moving and motivating all of the stuff, even to this day, and especially with the new Space Force initiative, right? Which I think comes out of the Nebraska Navy, which is the Space and Naval Warfare Center studies that have been done. And so some of this stuff has been picked up by the Blue Chicken Cult, by Corey Good and these guys. And but the disinformation around it is they just sort of glance over this and then go on. They don't tie it to Voyager, but they do tie the Space Force initiative to their classified secret space program and how it's all going to come on out. And I think that indeed it's all coming on out, but I think that again, whatever is motivating that release of information, because it's not in the interest of the powers that be to do this, right? Because of one key question that has to be answered. What happens when the public reaches that point of threshold to say, hey, wait a second, they've told us so much over the past 5 years, and now I realize they've been lying to us for the last 60 years, and they've been killing people and causing the whole society to take a twisted path with their super secrecy for these last 60 years. Someone's got to pay. So once we get to that point, to a certain threshold, these connections will be made in the minds of the general public. So this is a very delicate dance for the powers that be in terms of disclosure. If they come on out and just said tomorrow, yeah, hey, here's this little short squatty alien, he wants to say a few words, and then we're going to go on and tell you what we've been doing. Well, they're in deep trouble, because there's going to be all kinds of legal ramifications, and it won't be the riots or anything that'll be the issue. It'll be their past actions for these past 60 years of super secrecy. But I think the Space Force initiative is the cover under which they'll build or reveal our actual classified space program and all of these special access projects and so on. And I think there's a reason that it's happening at this point. Now, astrologically, et cetera, it may well relate to what's going on with the movement of the planets, the gas giants being over on our side of the sun and altering our orbit, as well as the reduction in the sun and all of these kind of things. The sum total of this may be doing it.
Yeah. Why do you think, or why is it that they are so worried about us knowing about extraterrestrial, I can't even say ETs and everything right now? Like, why do you think, what is the purpose? Like, do they just don't think we can handle it? Is there just too much information? I mean, what's the purpose? Why do they hide it from us?
Because they basically, the easiest way to think about it is that their power goes away. Okay, you don't need a power structure. You don't need government if you've got free energy and anti-gravity technology widely spread throughout your society. If you don't like living in a place, you hop in your anti-gravity vehicle and fly over. Borders are meaningless. You got friends of yours that grow interesting plants you want to smoke, you go get some. You don't care, right? And borders are meaningless. And so their control is gone. Their power is gone. Bear in mind that the Federal Reserve and these other central banks are there to bleed money off for the Rothschilds, to provide power for the top part of the structure of the pyramid. And so it's all about maintaining their grip on the social order such that they're the elite, they're the celebrities, they're the rich, they're the powerful. It's quite simple at that one level.
Yeah. Right. And well, speaking... Okay, so this is the last thing and then I'll get some questions from the audience. But what are your thoughts? Like you said here in your webbots also about, the mainstream media and alternative outlets, legal battles and everything, which spot on, here we come. And you even said late summer and boom, Alex Jones, his whole network shuts down. Do you think that it's all an act, or do you think legitimately he's finding there's too much he's saying, they're scared, things are coming out too much, and everybody's making
I think that the latter. Okay, I think that there's too much coming out. They're very scared. It was the action of just a couple of billionaires, right? It was a diktat, it was dictated to the social media by somebody in government, and somebody in government probably was Henry Kissinger. We know that there is this private group that is chartered, I'll use that word in air quotes, by the government to consult about the social media. And there's like 6 people there, maybe 5, I think, like 3 CIA guys, Henry Kissinger, who, by all rights should have died 20 years ago if he'd been human. And I think one other individual from another aspect of the control structure. And so these people tell the social media exactly what to do and when to do it. And it's because the social media is funded originally by the government to get them their start. The technology is a lot of it is originally written up by the government and fed out to them. So it's all quite corrupt at that level. And so the scared aspect of it can be concentrated into those few individuals that are in control of the larger apparatus by way of the CEOs. So they can tell them, no, you go in, we want these people deplatformed. And it's because and then the unspoken aspect of it is that they just put a period there. We want these individuals deplatformed, period. And then the other part of it that is simply unspoken is because of, and it comes down to our fears, right? And their fears are that they're losing control of the social order, that the media by which they used to do this level of control is no longer anywhere near as effective. So there's another aspect of this, okay, that needs to be examined. And that is that the large social media, what I had always called the internet ghettos or the social media ghettos, where they're trying to hurt us all, are not profitable, never have been profitable. And we're always, we'll make it up in volume. When we get 6 billion people, we'll be, instead of our 4.9 billion on our platform, we'll be profitable. So we just keep going until we make this magic number. And everybody believes the hype. They buy the shares, which provides the capital, which allows them to expand the servers and so on. And so as long as the hype is being believed, it's very much like a Ponzi scheme. New money keeps coming in and you can grow the social media this way, but they're not profitable. And now they've got a problem, and that problem is rapidly diminishing participation in energy levels on their platforms at all levels. So not only is Facebook losing more people that are signing up, so they're having a net loss year on year for the last couple of years. Not only is that the case, but Facebook is losing participation by those people that stay. And so then there's this power curve that you can look at. And so let's just choose something, Wikipedia. Okay, so Wikipedia, everybody knows what it is. It's a, if you want to help maintain it, you get permission and they allow you to help maintain the stuff. So anybody can volunteer. So it's 100% open to anybody that wants to participate. Yet all of the Wikipedia pages are maintained, 98% of all of the work on those pages is by a very small number of individuals. So some of the more visited pages might have several thousand people that are editors, but of those several thousand, it'll be 2 that are doing 98% of the work. And so it's that kind of a power curve that's going on. Now, it doesn't mean that those other people don't participate, but their level of participation is small relative to those 2 individuals. What's happening now is that this same effect is hitting the social media. So when people first logged into Facebook and they started adding stuff to it, there was every single user was a net contributor of new material to Facebook at a certain level. Well, over time, they become bored with it, tired, have other things to do, and disenchanted with it, etc. And their level of participation falls accordingly. And to where they're not throwing up all of this kind of stuff, they're adding maybe just a little bit occasionally. So every user within Facebook for like the last 4 or 5 years has the net amount of energetic participation in the form of new material has been dropping. And this we see reflected in Facebook's share prices, their ad revenue rates, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not limited to them. This is true of Twitter. It's true of Spotify, Instagram, Telegram, more so than others, YouTube even. All of these social media are in fact suffering these same sets of ills, all striking them at the same time. And a lot of it has to do with the adoption curve of the internet, the expectation of novelty coming into our brains, and how it's actually training us to become more bored more quickly with this kind of material. So after you've read, you're in your little bubble, and after you've read the 50th or 150th or 500th posting about how, David Wilcock is a shill, or, just to choose it as an example, then you end up with, you're bored with it. You don't care to read any more articles about that, right? And so unless there's something radically different that in that same subject matter, you're no longer tied into it. Plus, there's another aspect that's hidden from us. Facebook and all of these media have this algorithmic approach to keeping your eyeballs focused right on them. So they'll throw up more recommended anything to entice you to stay on their media longer. Well, again, they're training us through those techniques to ignore them, the same way we were trained as kids to ignore commercials in broadcast TV. And because it's interactive training, it happens quicker. It doesn't take you 10 years to screen out the commercials. You start doing it right away. And you also screen out their hidden agenda. So under the circumstances, the social media stuff and its and its level of degradation. It'll take it a long time to die, no question, just because it's big. But I think we passed that point where it was effectively alive and metabolizing, and now it's catabolizing. Now it's slowly, crushing in on itself. And so they're very vulnerable to government intervention in them, because usually in industries, when this occurs at these stages, the government takes them over one way or another. So it used to be we had a really horrific auto repossession guys running around. And then when that industry peaked, just about that time, government comes on in and lays down the rules for everybody, and they've all got to play this way. The same thing with power companies, phone companies. They bust up AT&T into all of the subsidiaries just at the peak of its power. And that's actually that point we're going on with the Facebook and these other media.
Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of Kevin Shipp, but he was a CIA guy, and now he's calling out everything. If anybody wants to know anything about, he breaks down each division and everything. And he said that it's a fact that they are gathering our information through AI to put us on a list in a cloud, because our information used to go to Utah or something, like all of our data. And now it's going on this cloud. So it's a security system. It has nothing to do with, they can't regulate it. So all of our information is gathered through AI, going to this cloud. And then he said, and then you're going to be put on lists if you're a threat, just so, to keep people controlled. That's what
and I wouldn't doubt that a bit. And I'm quite certain that the government does that because they've done it through history, even when they maintained the list by hand, right?
Right.
So that nothing new, it's just advancing that technology. Their problem, though, is this. Let's take that time when, the local political bosses in your neighborhood wrote down lists of who voted which way, so that they could lean on you if they wanted to try and influence elections, that sort of thing, right? Or the FBI and their agents gathering lists of organized crime, and that was all done by hand. The amount of time it took to get that information in order to put that name on the list was X big, and relative to the amount of the actual writing of the list. Now, because of technology, we've reduced the cost of putting someone's name on the list, and just by altering algorithms, you can sweep this group or discard anybody with those characteristics, etc. But that mere technology is their downfall. I've managed very large data systems like this, and retrieving the data in a manageable fashion is almost impossible. So yeah, they're going to put you on a list, but what they've done is expanded the list from 1% of the social order that may indeed be an actual threat to government to 80% of the social order, because we all express some of those ideas and anti-government thinking, right? And so what do? Do you arrest 80% of the population?
Yeah, I know. And it's so amazing on the positive side. Like, everybody is awake to things. I mean, people are coming out of, I think they're just so scared. They just don't know what to do with themselves. I mean, they're going to try everything, so.
No, that's our danger, and you've hit right on it. Okay, you're very astute that way. They're going to try everything, and that everything includes lots of stupid stuff that nonetheless will be nasty for us in the short term. And it's best, in my opinion, to be awake to the potential of that and have some level of forethinking about how one might encounter and deal with this, and keep yourself out of trouble, right?
Sleep with one eye open.
Right.
Yeah, oh, it's true.
Or keep a fire extinguisher there so you can bash them over the noggin.
That's why I have it. It puts out fires, and I can diffuse somebody. I could hit him over the head with it. It works great. Yeah. So, well, that's good news. It's scary, but I think if everybody comes together and stops, being so separate and crazy and psychotic and lunatics. I don't think we have to worry about that. I'm not counting on everybody doing anything. What I'm counting on is those people that have to manage this stuff and the problems they run into. So in the early days of computers, I was called in on a project where they had giant amounts of data, tons of data, everything they could ever want. Their problem was they could ask a question via the existing system at the time, but it would take 3 weeks before that system would start printing out the results to them.
And then it would take maybe 5 days to print it out because they had tons of paper or tons of data that they needed to get on paper. But it was the 3-week cogitation time of the machines cranking out all these unions and joins in the data set that was causing the issues. Now they're at a different level of technical speed, but they have a different level of problem. And that is that the government's data and, NSA and everybody, their data set is essentially the whole world. And their problem is to reduce that down to a manageable chunk that some person can take action on. And so, the how do I want to say it? The control freaks, the inbuilt bureaucratic deep state control mechanism now has a problem where they're not able to hand over a list of the enemies of the state in any meaningful fashion because that list is so large. So they're going to have to subdivide on the list. And when they start trying to ask, the IT department, well, give me the list of the 10, the 10% that's the worst. Well, they'll have to define this and they'll be missing others. The whole system is breaking down at that level.
Yeah. And, I will say this, because I work 1 mile from NSA, my clients, I sell homes, and my community is strictly NSA Fort Meade buyers. And I ask them inappropriate questions that make them uncomfortable and see what they say. Sometimes they answer, sometimes they don't. But I'm going to tell you, just the traffic on that, like the accidents have picked up. The stress, like I notice all this stuff, the stress of the people around there and the clients that I have, like at the homeowner functions, I mean, the ones that work there, you can just tell the change, and they're all on edge. They're all on their toes. Crazy things are happening. And, and I look at how you can see it in real individuals because they're right there in front of me. And I'm like, oh God, I would just love to know what's going on back there.
No, you probably don't. You probably don't want to know. You wouldn't sleep well,
I know. All right. Well,
but that's kind of cool that you have that personal gut level of validation of, of the changing environment around us.
Yeah. And then I get their charts. and then I analyze those. It's funny, but it's like I've learned so much this way. It's been a nice.
Well, and here's something about influences on time. Okay, there's only one point in our lives when any human has choice, and this can be ascertained just by thinking about it. You'll know what I'm going to say is true. The only time we actually have choice is in the now. And it's kind of stupid to say that, but if you think about it, you don't have any choice about something that's going to happen in the future until you get to that point in the future. You can't have any choice about anything that's happened in the past because it's sealed, it's done, and so on. So if we're living in a little bubble of the ever-present now, think of how most people don't live in the now. They're always thinking of something in the future, thinking of something into the past. So they're missing many opportunities for choice within this particular bubble of the now. Now, in that bubble, because all of universe is energetic, within that bubble, there are going to be energetic influences on us that we might think of as like big dogs that are providing herding of us towards specific kinds of choices. So, for instance, at any given time, universe is not going to favor you deciding to go and get on a boat and sail down the coast, right? It's not an open choice, but there would be times when there would be energetic influences that would favor this. And those energetic influences are constraints on our bubbles of choice. And so the way astrology could be thought of as working is not in any kind of compulsion kind of a fashion, but rather as universe using wave guides that are trying to steer us into an appropriate set of choices or appropriate region from which to make choices.
Yes.
And so under those circumstances, these poor fellows that work at the NSA are not only having their regular job constraints, the generalized population, the deep state cannibalizing itself or attacking itself, all of these kind of things stressing them, but they're also going to have all of their choices constrained by the energetic influences that are affecting them. And frequently it'll be that collision. So if you can find someone that's like fighting the generalized astrological influences, you can probably predict that no good will result from this, especially at this time.
Yeah, it's Saturn. Saturn gives you those restraints too. Like I've noticed everybody in the Saturn dashas, when Saturn's influencing, that's what keeps you stuck.
Well, and again, it's those gas giants, and they're over here on our side of the solar cone for the next probably the next 420 years, because we're about 5 years into it, and it lasts for about 425 years. And so we're about to enter the most intense period, which is basically about 100 years long. And so it's going to get even more so. So back to your original question there, yeah, I think the next few years are going to just be crazy as shit, and getting crazier by the day, to the point that we're living in maybe something like a Blade Runner world, right? Without maybe even with a lot of that kind of technology as well. In fact, that hopefully we will have some compensation for the total batshit craziness of the social order, as well as those trying to govern it. Bear in mind, they're going to keep trying to govern for a number of years, even as this whole thing degrades.
And what do you think? So you think, it's going to be crazy. Is there anything that you could pin out that, maybe your dad has said for 2019-20, that something that's just down?
Okay, so yeah, here's what we're looking at. It's economic and financial and fiscal. Now, I'm not giving financial advice, but I'm going to give a description of the economic and the fiscal and the financial world that we'll be entering into. And the problem is that our currencies are dying, okay? And it's not just the US dollar, it's all of the other paper currencies, all the other fiat currencies of the planet. Thus today we have all the problems with the Turkish dinars, right? The Turkish currencies, or lira, I think they are going crazy, and their currency has been crashing over the last couple of weeks. We've had the drop. We've had all of they couldn't crash the currency, but we've had the same effect on the economies of Greece, Portugal, and these kind of states within the European Union. These are symptoms. These are not causes. These are symptoms. Whenever you have a major fiat currency collapse, it always collapses from the outer fringe inward. So when the British pound sterling collapsed as the reserve currency, because basically they started losing wars, and their military, after they'd invaded 140 countries over the course of 100 plus years, their military was less effective. It was stretched too thin, could no longer maintain the empire, and something had to give. And the first indications of that empire collapse are fiscal, in the sense that the money itself comes under attack. And we're seeing that now with the Turkish lira. We've seen it with other currencies. We've seen the baht, Thai baht, and a few other currencies in the Southeast Asia in the past few years collapse. And now we're also in currency and trade wars with China. So we're getting very close to the collapse of the central currency, which is the Federal Reserve dollar. Bear in mind, this currency is forced on us under penalty of law and so on. You're not allowed to basically do any number of different kind of financial operations within the US without using dollars and paying tax on it. And thus the effect of this is going to be huge. But for us, we'll be the last ones personally affected, because it takes a long time for the currency collapse to work its way back to the shores of the originating country. When we had the currency collapse of the British pound sterling and it finally reached Britain, it was a terrible time for Britain that lasted about 50 years and saw them through 2 world wars begging for funding from the U.S. and all of their former colonies, just to be able to support them through these World War efforts. So they were in dire straits. They could not have financed a war with Germany on their own. If America had not participated, Britain would have had to capitulate, because they didn't have the funding for it. And so we're facing that same kind of situation now relative to the currencies and the economy. Now, what we've got going for us is that there's all these new innovative financial and economic initiatives that are occurring just at this time. But in my opinion, it's going to be a period of time where the old system is dying and a new one is being born through it. And if one in this country or anywhere in the world aligns themselves with the new stuff being born and distances themselves from the old system as it's dying, they will be personally better off. So it's a more pragmatic decision, right?
Right.
And so I think it'd be better as a programmer to program in the cryptocurrency world, as wild and unstable as it is, and as scary as it is, rather than to commit as a programmer for the NSA and their old legacy systems of trying to maintain control. It's just that kind of way. the chaos that we're going to find for the next few years won't be confined to the economic, because that influences everything else. So you can see that as the economy declines, we have the social media coming under pressure. Their ad revenues are going to fall. Their valuations will fall. They'll crumble even more. Their impact on the social order will be less. There will be fewer points of control for the major players in the control structure to influence the social order. As these things occur, there will be new systems that will be emerging during this period of time that will take the slack. And under the circumstances, it's going to be a wild and chaotic ride that is going to last at least into the mid-2020s, with, I think, in the US anyway, some kind of peak of activity. And you would be able to say better than I about the astrology, but I would think the peak of activity would be in the summer of 2020.
I think that sounds about right.
And it's going to be rather scary. This is why I think a lot of the cryptocurrency world, in spite of all of the FUD, all of the other problems, et cetera, is just so valuable, because it gives us an outlet, a new asset class that's not tied to the diminishing dollar, that will benefit from the hyperinflation that the diminishing dollar is going to have to bring. Bear in mind that what's happening now is a liquidity crisis. Okay, this liquidity crisis is now starting to affect housing. We're going to go through the bursting of the housing bubble 2.0. We're going to have the liquidity crises affect government, where they won't be able to pay to get stuff done. Once that starts hitting the US, you can see that your clientele, this is at a personal level, your clientele is going to diminish. The government will have to lay off all kinds of workers because they won't be able to pay to maintain the security state, because they won't have real assets to convert to meaningful currencies to give to these people. And that's because the dollar itself doesn't have the purchasing power that it used to. That's what our trade war is about with China. Trump is and the administration, the reason they're fighting the trade war with China, whatever they may think, at its core level is based on Kondratov's, who was a Russian mathematician, on his relative valuation mathematics. And so basically what's happening is the US dollar only has 2 cents or less. I think it's probably less than 1 cent now of purchasing power. The dollar, when in 1913, when it was created, it cost you $600 to buy a brand new Ford, and cost you 3 cents for a gallon for gasoline. And now, of course, look at the costs involved in buying a brand new Ford, $50,000, and it costs $3 or $4 for a gallon of gas. And so the purchasing value of the dollar has shrunk so much that the only way we can maintain things is to fight a trade war. And it's it's really goofy the way that government reacts to these, because government is desperate for money. We see that in the state governments, and we see it in the federal government, although less so, admittedly, at this stage. But the federal government and the security state. So let's look at some real statistics. 19.5% of the United States economy is involved in healthcare. Well, we can't afford that. Right? As our dollar shrinks, that's going to shrink. The impacts are going to be most where we're spending the most money. Well, we're spending on a tax level, we're spending better than, and if you actually figure in the generated non-tax money that the state uses, we're spending better than 38% on our security state. And we can also factor in the military in there. We won't be able to afford that. And so the threat of the security state is going to diminish because we won't be able to pay for it any longer. The only thing that could turn this around would be a jump start into the next level of economic efficiencies, change, et cetera. So maybe that next level is going to be defined as a space-based economy. And if that's the case, the only way we can generate value and reward that value, that is to say, have a currency that can buy something, would be to create value at a huge level with this space-based activity. I don't see that happening to the point that it's going to sustain the purchasing power of the currency over these next few years. I do see it coming in play, but I don't think that the corporations will be able to ramp up their spending and capital investment into space to the point of getting a big enough return to offset the degradation of the dollars that they're spending and so on. absent the introduction of radical, reverse space alien engineered technologies. If we were to suddenly jump into free energy and anti-gravity and this kind of thing, that's a game changer. Then we can print as much money as we want because it no longer matters relative to the resources of the planet, because we wouldn't be bound by that. We would have the ability to go off planet for resources, and thus we would be in a truly open system. Now we're in a closed system where we've monetized everything on the planet, not really, but essentially from the viewpoint of the Federal Reserve. And in so doing, our system was based on a growth-based model. And once we stop growing, it's collapse time. And so that's where we are with our money. So I'm not particularly worried about the deep state, because I think it'll be defunded unless or the other alternative, which actually I would prefer, let the deep state stay there. I don't care. Let them grow. Let them hire more people. Let them dig more holes in the ground and have more screwy ass special access projects. But as long as they release the technology, the rest of us can go about our business and not worry about them.
Yeah. Good point. Okay, so I caught one question in here, and can you explain the expanding Earth theory?
Sure, it's real easy. It's really easy to see it too. Everybody knows that if you look at a globe or a map, all the continents fit together. If you take the space in the water between the continents away, they all snug up together and they're a nice cohesive whole. And this has led scientists and modern academics to postulate on this thing called Pangea or Gondwana land, which was one giant continent, and they think it all broke up and the continents are drifting apart and there's continental drift and all of these kind of things. All of this is wrong. What actually happens is that the Earth has a plasma core. A plasma is a super hot gas that behaves under certain conditions. We don't have a molten nickel iron core. For one thing, no amount of metal that's molten of any configuration can generate a magnetic field. So the idea that the spinning molten iron and nickel core is what's generating the magnetosphere around Earth is bullshit, because molten metal can't hold nor generate a magnetic core, and how big it is it doesn't matter. So the plasma can generate and does generate, plasmas generate vast quantities of magnetism. But the plasma core, by nature of that magnetism and its own structure, captures cosmic rays. So they don't actually go through the planet. They only go down to the core of the planet where they get captured. And high energy particles, tachyons, all these kind of things. And it gathers those, and because it's energy, and because the energy comes to a hard stop inside the plasma, we get this situation where E equals mc squared, and it's actually that matter equals energy confined and trapped and condensed. So the energy's got to do something. It's got to go somewhere because it's growing continuously over time. And as a result of that, we have new matter forming in the middle of the planet, usually hydrogen, the other gases, and some of the hydrocarbons. And so that's where we get oil, that's where we get water, that's where we get methane, and a lot of these other gases that will bubble up out of the planet. They're being created in the middle of the planet. Thus, if we have a hard shell concreted around the hot plasma, when the plasma produces new matter, that hard shell has to expand and it has to crack apart. And that's what's causing the separation of the continents. That's why Earth is bigger all the time. That's why our orbit is no longer 360 days, it's 365.25 days. So, and we have a historical record in some social orders where current scientists thought that these people were stupid because they recorded that there were 280 days in the year. And so scientists were saying, well, these people couldn't count, and it's like, well, if they couldn't count that badly, and we actually did have 365 days in the year, they would have starved because their planting cycles would have been off. And all primitive societies base their math not on internal circadian rhythms or anything, but on the stars and the planetary movements, the equinoxes, the solstices, and so on. And that's how they keep accurate records of time. And it's necessary to do that just so if you've got agriculture, so you can plant at the appropriate time of the year. So I don't think they were stupid because they persisted for 1,000 plus years in a 280-day annual orbit. And then over time, we've grown to where we're at 365 days. And as our planet expands even more, because of the nature of this, we'll drop further behind the sun ever so slightly, but it'll add length to our days. And thus we see that our orbit and our annual precession around the sun changes relative to our mass, and it ties into this. So it's self-referencing at that level, right? And you can go to YouTube, you can type in Neil Adams, and he's done some good graphics about this that show you that process. And so if you extract 60% of the mass of our planet, all of the continents fit together exquisitely. And there was just basically a few lakes and no oceans. As it cracks, the water comes in and forms and fills in the oceans. This is why the bottom of the ocean is always going to be the newest material on our planet. So the oldest material on our planet are up on the continents. And anything on the continental shelf is tremendously older than any ocean basin anywhere. And it's because the oceans are continually forming new matter and splitting and moving apart. And we see this in the land now because we're in an expansion period. The expansion period is also aggravated or caused by the gas giants being on the same side of the sun as us. They twist the earth and provide some torque that doesn't usually exist. They'll do so for a number of years. It'll cause more volcanic activity, but it'll also, because the sun is reduced, it'll cause more energy to get trapped by our plasma as that energy comes around the sun. It's fun times.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I think I've taken enough of your time. So I appreciate you coming on.
Sure. No problem at all.
Thank you so much. And always great to talk to you, Clif. Wait.
Yep,
okay. No, I'm not going to ask that question. They want a Bitcoin answer. They want
yeah.
Put that in at the end. Wait, what are Clif's thoughts on the Federal Reserve, AML, Bitcoin, AKA AML, KYC?
They have to co-op. They have to try and co-op. It's a regulated kind of a system. So it's trying to co-op the cryptocurrencies into their banking system. I'm pretty sure it won't be successful.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty. Thanks.